Hello, art history. Welcome to what I hope will be a weekly talk about highlights of the artworks you are assigned each week. I may do one or two depending on how many works we cover each week. Rather than try to cover everything about each work, I will instead focus on what I believe is the most important elements of the work, why it may be on our artwork list, and how it may connect to other works on our list. I do want to preface this video and all highlight videos with the fact that you need to have read the Khan Academy readings before you watch the videos, because some things will not make sense. I am assuming that you have read these already, so you already have some foreknowledge of the artworks. All right, so please read your Khan Academy readings first before you watch these videos so that everything will make sense to you. All right, so we are actually going to begin with a work, Templo Mayor, that was not included in my videos from the week before last. Templo Mayor was the main temple structure in Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire and now Mexico City. The structure consisted of two temples, one each for the two major gods of the Aztec pantheon, Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the solar war god and the god of rain and farming, respectively. In your notes, I want you to write down why you think these were the two most important gods. Huitzilopochtli, the temple on the right, or whose temple was on the right, red here. Much like Huitzilopochtli was the patron deity of the Aztecs, much like Athena was the patron deity of Athens, Greece. What temple did the Athenians build in her honor? That temple featured a sculptural narrative of her origin story. Similarly, the temple to Huitzilopochtli and the high-stepped platform it sits on functioned as the physical embodiment of his fantastical origin story. Now, this is what makes it different from the Greek Parthenon. Rather than just make a picture of the story, Templo Mayor becomes the actual site of Huitzilopochtli's triumphant birth, which was dramatically and gruesomely reenacted at religious festivals. These festivals thus become not only performances to honor Huitzilopochtli, but performances of Aztec power. The message would be unmistakable: surrender to the Aztecs or else. Unfortunately, the protection of Huitzilopochtli failed when the Spanish arrived with guns and disease. Templo Mayor was completely destroyed by the conquistadors, its ruins buried underneath the new city that arose, built by the Spanish using materials from the temple and other Aztec structures. We have seen this before as a tactic used by conquering or otherwise triumphant groups. Santa Sabina in Italy used materials from a torn-down pagan temple not simply for economy's sake, but in order to demonstrate the superiority of Christianity. While the religious element is certainly present in the use of spolia from Templo Mayor, it was also political. The temple and its sacred precinct was the center of the Aztec world, its axis mundi. The Spanish did not just destroy the most important temple of the Aztecs, they destroyed the Aztec world. Amidst this destruction, however, was the recognition of the need to record the customs, organization, and administration of the Aztec Empire in codices like the Codex Mendoza that we see here. This would have been valuable information for the Spanish colonizers, and it retains that function for scholars today. Though the making of codexes or books was a tradition for several Central American peoples, Aztecs included, very few still exist today. They were burned as part of the effort to convert indigenous populations to Christianity. The only Aztec codices in existence now are those made at the behest of the Spanish, like the Codex Mendoza, meant for the King of Spain. This work was chosen for our artwork list, probably because it elaborates on the Aztec worldview we first encountered at Templo Mayor. This frontispiece illustration succinctly explains the origin story of the Aztecs and Tenochtitlan. This story involves Huitzilopochtli, the patron deity whose temple forms a part of Templo Mayor. He told the Aztecs to look for a sign, an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus growing from a stone that we see in the detail here. There, the Aztecs should build their new city. The illustrator of the frontispiece placed this image in the center of the page at the intersection of the X. It is also the largest part of the illustration, dwarfing the many figures. This image, which will become one of the symbols of the Mexican state, will be seen again shortly as part of another image that helped make New Spain not simply a Spanish colony, but a place all its own. It was at this juncture in the readings that I began to notice something curious happening, the myth of a people coming into being. I use the term myth loosely here. When I say myth of a people, I mean the story a people tells about themselves, about who they believe themselves to be. Believe is the key word here. Because what a people believes themselves to be may not be actual truth. For example, part of the American myth is that we believe ourselves to be equal to each other. That is our great ideal. However, we know how seldom we actually live up to that ideal. Anyways, these two images, this one from the Codex Mendoza and this one, the Virgin of Guadalupe, are, it seems to me, part of the myth of what will become the Mexican nation. Now, this is not the whole story, and I don't claim to know it either, but the reading makes it clear that these images become key in creating an identity separate from the Spanish motherland. I am going to circle back to this idea, but first I want to focus on a few things that were new to me and extraordinarily fascinating given how important this image becomes. I was already familiar with the outline of the miracle story, but I did not know, one, this occurred 10 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan, two, Juan Diego was a recently converted Aztec, and three, the location of the miracle on the hill of Tepeyac was a destroyed shrine to an Aztec earth goddess. Furthermore, the Virgin spoke to Juan Diego in Nahuatl, his native language. What I see in this miracle story is the syncretization of indigenous Aztec belief in Spanish Catholicism. We've talked about syncretism a bit before, but this is the coming together, the synthesis of two religious systems. In this artwork, and the next, we can understand how Spanish missionaries packaged Christianity, shall we say, for the indigenous population. While the missionaries decried the paganism of indigenous belief, they also encouraged a transference of belief in some ways. The Aztec earth goddess becomes the Virgin Mary. Sacred supernatural Aztec beings become angels, as we will see shortly. This transference made the Christianization process easier for the missionaries, and presumably more palatable for the colonized Aztecs. It is because of this that what happens in the next 200 years or so becomes rather curious to me. Devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe grows throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, resulting in the establishment of a feast day for her in 1754. The story of Guadalupe is picked up and promoted in New Spain by Creoles. Now, Creoles were pure-blooded Spaniards born in the colonies. This section of the population used the story of the Virgin appearing to a new indigenous Christian as proof that the colony had found favor with God. The story then becomes part of the story or the myth of Mexico. something uniquely its own, separate from Spain. To further this identification of Guadalupe with Mexico, many images of her, like ours by Miguel Gonzalez, included the eagle and cactus iconography we saw on the Codex Mendoza, and it is right down here in its elaborate shell frame. It is through these images that Creoles create their own Mexican identity apart from Spain. Speaking of creation, while colonization brings about a great deal of destruction, the interplay of cultures can also bring new things into being, and art is the perfect place to witness this. Take, for instance, our Angel with Arquebus by the Master of Calamarca. To be honest, I had never seen this type of iconography before, and it certainly seems a strange juxtaposition. Angels and guns? What? Putting the novelty factor aside, I think this artwork was included because it so expertly combines several Spanish colonial concerns, this time in South America. While the Virgin Mary has been used as a replacement for indigenous earth goddesses, angels were also used in a similar fashion to encourage the transference of belief from native to Christian. Angels came to stand in for a variety of native deities and other beings. The addition of the gun added to the celestial aura of these angels because, as you're reading on Can Academy notes, and I quote here, indigenous people saw guns as supernatural manifestations, unquote, given that they had never seen such powerful weapons before. Finally, the angel's costume also incorporated elements of Incan elites, like the feathered hat. And this is his feathered hat, and this is his wing. These are his wings right here, but this is his hat. All of this imagery, angel, gun, and costume, combine to create a vision of an intensely powerful being that Andean, or indigenous, eyes would have recognized. The genius of this artwork, however, is that it is an image of Spanish power as well. Angels were soldiers of God, protecting and defending the Catholic faith. The gun only reinforces this idea. The costume, with its gold embroidery and abundance of lace, incorporates familiar elite European fashion elements as well. Spanish eyes would also have seen a powerful celestial being, but would have also identified it with the political and religious conquest of their country. Of the Americas. Perhaps even a Spaniard might have identified himself with the angel as a fellow soldier of God. This combination of imagery and elements is also key in the folding screen with the Siege of Belgrade, but it reaches across oceans, both east and west, for its inspiration. This artwork finds its way to our artwork list because it demonstrates the popularity for Japanese artworks brought to New Spain by Pacific trade routes. The black and floral borders at the top and bottom of the screen imitate Japanese lacquerware, while the additions of mother of pearl inlay, or encanchado, also seen in our Virgin of Guadalupe, to both the borders and the main scenes add a glimmering quality that in Japanese screens, like our red and white plum blossoms by Ogata Corinne, was created by gold leaf backgrounds. On the other hand, the subject matter of the main scene, the Siege of Belgrade, clearly links the power of the viceroy, the head administrator of New Spain, with that of the Spanish Empire back in Europe, one that successfully defeated the Ottoman Turks in the siege depicted. Visitors to the ceremonial sitting room where this originally stood would be effectively reminded of their host's status and power. Of course, this screen has a whole other side painted for a whole other audience, but I leave that for you to learn about on Can Academy. And finally, our last painting is perhaps the one on our list that makes me, to be honest, the most uncomfortable, but that does not lessen its importance. Indeed, sometimes art should make us uncomfortable. It can help us to see that which we would prefer not to see, and think about that which we would prefer not to think. Spaniard and Indian produced a mestizo, attributed to Juan Rodriguez, is a type of painting known as a casta painting. These paintings attempt to document the mixing of races that occurred in New Spain. And while we can, to some extent, connect this with the Enlightenment interest in categorizing and ordering things, like the way we categorize animals of all kinds into a variety of descending groups, like kingdom and class and phylus and species. These casta paintings are not nearly so innocent, nor we should allow ourselves to be so naive as to think so. These paintings document Spanish concern with the mixing of races, a concern that actually originated in mainland Spain after the Christians won control back from the Muslim Moors. In Old Spain, the concern there was with the mixing of Christians with Muslims or Jews. This notion transferred to New Spain, where it was based on race rather than religion. One's race in New Spain determined what privileges and opportunities were open to a person, or not. Casta paintings, when seen in the full series of 16 paintings, or sometimes 16 vignettes on one canvas, clearly link race to social class. The series is always arranged in a hierarchy in which whiter, more Spanish, more well-off couples and their children are shown. The further down each couple in the series, the darker they are, and the lower they tend to be in socioeconomic status. Each painting or vignette would also include text identifying the racial category of the mother and father, along with the new category created by their child. These labels, as your reading notes, could be quite curious, reflecting anxiety about racial mixing on the part of the Spanish colonizers. Overall, these paintings commissioned by the Spanish elite reflect an attempt to control the diverse population of New Spain, at least in theory, if not in practice. Thank you all for joining me in our first highlight video. If you have any questions regarding these artworks or your readings on them, please reach out to me via email or Remind101. I hope you are doing well. I miss you all very much, my art history students, and I will speak with you soon.